All right, we're going to get started. If those of you out there in the narthex would come on in here and join us. We need to get you somebody you can race with. Margaret, that's no fair. You got wheels. Yeah, that's right. Well, if it comes down to it, Margaret, you could just throw your cane down in front of her. I don't see her popping any wheelies or doing any bunny hops. All right. So before we get started, I want to make sure we have a quorum. There's only one piece of business, and that's the approval of the annual report. If you don't have an annual report, it was sent to you electronically. There are a couple of copies out there. I don't know that there's enough for everybody. So if you have a tablet or a phone or something that you can look at it, or if you can share, that would be helpful. But let me start by, do we have a quorum, Madam? All right, Madam Clerk insists we have a quorum, so that's good news. Let me start us with a word of prayer. God, we come to you both grateful for the year that has passed and all that was done and accomplished, and also eagerly looking forward to what is next, trusting you to take us into this next year and the years beyond, helping us to be faithful to the work to which you have called us, helping us to be mindful of who we are as individuals and as a community, and to be faithful to all that it is that we have been created to be. We pray all of these things in your name. Amen. All right, so as we get started this morning, I'd like to just start by saying a couple of words before we get to the necrology report. There is a tendency in church, not just this church, but in any church, to think about health only in terms of the number of people who sit in a pew in a worship service on Sunday morning. I understand that tendency. It is one that is easy to measure. And in some ways, it is reflective of a church that is healthy, a church that is growing, generally is a church that is meeting needs. And yet, that isn't always the case. In a moment, I'm going to be sharing a little bit with you about some of the highlights of this last year. And it strikes me that there are ways that we as a church haven't yet fully recovered from the COVID pandemic. There are people who have not returned to worship and don't seem inclined to do so. There are programs that we were once running that we seem to struggle to be able to continue to run. And yet, when I stop and consider what it means to be the body of Christ, I am very proud to be your pastor. I think there are ways that we as a community of faith are healthy in ways that big churches, if you want to call it that and label it that way, are not. Some of them having to do directly with what we talked about this morning in the service. I saw some of you even in that worship, even during that sermon, looking around and noticing, hey, wait a minute, that person seems to be struggling. Maybe they shouldn't have to go it alone. That, in my estimation, speaks a lot more about the health of this church than the number of people who may be sitting in the pews on Sunday morning. That being said, one of the things that the session has been working on, and they're going to share with you a little bit later in this meeting, is some of the work that they've been trying to do to help us consider how we might engage those people out there for whom worship doesn't seem to matter that much. Because worship isn't all that we do as a church. There are a lot of ways that we can engage the world around us that don't involve sitting in these pews. This church is about as involved and engaged in mission as any church I have ever seen. And I've been in a church that was 1,000 members worshiping on Sunday morning. So there is a lot that is going on in this church. And there are a lot of ways that we might engage the world around us and invite them to participate, that we might be able to interact with them, that will further indicate the health and the well-being of our congregation. I want you to know up front that I am thankful every day that God brought me and my family to Brighton, Colorado. I am proud to be your pastor, and I am proud of this congregation for what you mean to each other especially, and because I believe that we can and will mean as much to the community around us as we do to each other. They may not care whether or not we worship, but I believe that they do and will want us to be a part of the community. So let us begin this morning, this morning's annual meeting with the necrology report. I'm going to read the names of those members who have passed in the last year. When I am done, I am going to invite you to share names of those in your own life, people that you love or have loved and have lost, whether they be members or not, that we might all take a moment to reflect together. So this year, in January 10th, Gladys Ekman passed away. On January 25th, Betty Stevenson. On February 12th, Helen Seart. On June 7th, both Bob Sakata and Art Herrera died. And on October 31st, Laurel Swore died. I want to invite you now to share any names of those that we may have lost in this last year that were not members of this church and whose names may not be listed there. Bill? Jerry Martindale. Thank you, Bill. Madge Clausen, Doris Aldrich, Dan Brickley, Evelyn and Lester Welch, Dolly Jabauer. Let's take just a moment of silence to thank God for these saints who have passed, after which I will pray. Lord God, we give you thanks. We give you thanks for the people that you put around us, for the people that you have placed in our lives who love us, who cherish us, who hold us up. We give you thanks for those who remind us every day that we do not have to go it alone. And we give you thanks also for the grief that we feel as we lose them. For that grief is a reminder of the love that we have shared in this life and in this place. It is a reminder that things are not as they should be. And it is a reminder that there is something beyond this place for which we hope. We ask God that by your resurrection, our grief would be mitigated, that we might know the joy that is only possible through the promise of that resurrection. We pray all of these things in your name. Amen. All right. Well, I would like to start or continue this meeting real quick, with I just need to find the page here, just a second. In your hands, the hands of many of you, is our annual report. And I don't know why, but it is sometimes easy for me to get caught up in all the work that I have to do, all the things that are coming up, that I forget to take some time to reflect and celebrate all that has been done and all that I have accomplished. I think this is true for the church too, and partly probably due to my leadership. I'm not always good at stopping and reflecting. I'm always moving on to what is next. And I want us, even as we turn towards 2023 and this next year and what is coming, to take a moment to reflect and celebrate on what we were able to do in 2022. And so, like I did last year, I have just pulled some things out of that annual report. Clearly, I couldn't take everything out. It's 20 plus pages, and some of us want to eat lunch today. So I'll give you a couple of highlights. We purchased a new digital sign. Thanks to Rich for updating that for us every week. We ran electrical and digital connections out to the chapel area to make it easier for us to use. We supported ministries like Almost Home, the ZMP, Presbyterian Missions, and the Heifer Project. We supported the people of Ukraine in various ways. We provided, I believe it's 9 riders for the ZMP ride. Is that right? It is. Oh man, look at me go. Which helps raise money for daily meals, clean water, clothing, medical care, school fees for 600 orphans in Zimbabwe. We provided 53 Christmas presents for kids who may not have had them otherwise, and we raised over $4,500 through our alternative gift market. We took 3 meals down to New Genesis and collected over 800 pounds of food for the food bank. We hosted the CVP every week, which provided over 200 visitations for parents with their children. We hosted the Ugly Quilts, and some of us helped stitch. 134 sleeping bags that included a coat, a hat, a scarf, gloves, socks, toiletries, and devotional materials. We hosted the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, a couple of basketball teams, a school, the Platte Valley Players, Brighton Music, and a small Hispanic church. We helped paint and spruce up a home through Brighton Help for Homes, provided books through a free little library. We hosted an Ash Wednesday service, a Lenten lunch, a Maundy Thursday supper, a Good Friday service, a Blue Christmas service, 2 Christmas Eve services, and 12 funerals on top of all of the regular services that we do every Sunday morning. There were 19 prayer shawls distributed. We had an inaugural all-church retreat, 41 people. And we welcomed 5 new members into our membership. And I want us to take just a moment to celebrate and to recognize all that we have done together in the past year. Thank you. I hope you all are as proud as I am of what we have been able to accomplish. And I hope that we recognize that God is not done with this church, that there is yet more that God wants to do. We make a difference in the lives of people. We make a difference for the kingdom of God. And so I want to say thank you to all of you, and I want to invite you to thank the people around you for all the work that they do. I can send you my notes. Poor Kim's fingers are smoking over there. All right. At this point, I would like to invite Joe Henderson forward. He's going to share our financial reports from our fiscal year of 2022. Do you want to use this or that?
Can I stand here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Morning, everybody. I asked Chris if this was a 2-donut meeting, and he said no. So I'll keep this brief. So I'm just giving you a summary of what the Treasurer's report shows that it was in the annual report. Just looking to see if I have the same thing that's on the screen. You can see that we had an income of roughly $300,000. And I think what we really want to highlight are two things here, since there's only 3 items. Our biggest income source is pledge contributions to this church. So that's all of us sitting here. We support this church. And so it's important for us to continue to do so. Something we can't forget is that rental income is huge for us right now. And I listed off the 4 sources that we have of rental income. And Brighton Leadership Academy, just the Reader's Digest version of Brighton Leadership Academy, is they've been renting, it's a school that's been renting from us for several years. And they sign a contract for the school year. And I'm trying to remember, 3 or 4 years ago, they had elementary school kids in here, and they lost the charter for that school. And so now we have senior high school kids here. And we're nervous, honestly, that whether they'll lose a charter for that. So it's just something that we have to keep in the back of our mind. And you'll see on the 3rd slide or 4th slide where I'll say we're pretty strong financially, and that's true as long as Brighton Leadership Academy is still around. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we had, if you remember what the last slide says, we have more expenses than we had income. And you can see our big ticket items are personnel, which we can't do this without the people who work in the church. And then maintenance is a big one, for sure, because we have to take care of this building and the grounds. And then administration, that number is so big because that includes our insurance, because we do have to have insurance on our buildings. So if we can go to the next slide. We had a $6,000 deficit for the year, roughly. And if you remember, I guess I remember, that we budgeted a $27,000 deficit. And so really, we ended up the year really good. And so why did we have a lower deficit than we budgeted? We had higher rental income. And so since we are uncertain about Brighton Leadership Academy, we only budget what we know we have a contract for now, as opposed to assuming they're going to be here in the fall as well. So that's the same thing our budget showed this year, is that we budgeted the contract that we know, we budgeted the contract we have and not assume that another one's coming in. We had lower personnel costs in 2022 because we had budgeted for Christian ed person that we never hired. And then we had lower maintenance costs. So I know that the folks in the on the Buildings and Grounds Committee work hard to do a lot of the work themselves, and that saves the church a lot of money. I appreciate that. We all do, right? Yeah. So here's the part where I talk about our financial health. And we have a strong financial position because we have minimal debts. You know, I don't know, I'm sure maybe you don't know if you haven't been in this church a long time, but this building was paid off when we moved in. So that's huge. There's a lot of churches out there that are struggling to pay for their building, but it's huge that this building has been paid off for 30 some years, right? We do have a loan on the roof that we pay on every month, and it doesn't cost us a lot of money, and we'll just keep paying on it until it's paid off. We've got money in savings, and that's big. We have endowments, and that helps to pay for some things. We did take distributions this year, last year, for endowments to help pay for that sign out front. We do have CDs that we're moving to money markets to earn higher interest, and then we've got cash. And who knows, we might actually move more cash to the money market, just for that occasion where we might need it. And so I would entertain any questions that anyone might have. Is there anybody on session who's here today? Oh, there you are. Just teasing.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe. We appreciate that.
I'm just reporting all the work that Tom did this year. So we really need to appreciate Tom.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. And for those of you who don't know, we have a lot of Toms in this church. It was Tom Amos, not one of the other plethora of Toms that we have. All right, at this point, the session has some things that they would like to share with you. They brought both a South property update, a very brief property update update on the South property, and then something that we have been working on for quite a while is a new committee structure that we would also like to share with you and invite you to consider and ask questions about. So I'm going to start by inviting up those who are going to talk with us about about these things. Oh yeah. Yeah. I stand corrected.
Does this work? Yeah. So we just wanted to go over briefly what our values are that were established when? A year or two ago?
2021, I think.
Yeah. So because we wanted to make sure that all our decisions going forward were based on these values, so we'll just go over them briefly. Number one is it's Christ-centered. We wanted all our decisions to be based on that. Like how can we live out what Christ would do, all our decisions based on that. Number two is courageous love, and really the whole sermon was about that. So I don't know if I need to define that too much, but just loving each other, loving people in the community, making sure that everything we do is inclusive, and no matter who it is, no matter what we do, is to make sure that everyone is welcome and everyone feels loved, no matter what their circumstances are. So that's a brief discussion, definition of that.
And then we have selfless mission. And I'm just going to read these because we worked a long time on wordsmithing these, and I want to put it out there as much as we can. So, selfless mission. We value a church that is willing to pour itself out to join God in healing the world. We believe we must care more about the well-being of others than we do our own agenda. And then number 4 is thriving in and through diversity. We value a church that welcomes diverse opinions, experiences, and perspectives. Such diversity can cause theological tension. We believe that where such theological tensions arise, so long as they don't conflict with our Christ-centeredness, we must be willing to bear that tension in love, listening to, learning from, and being changed by the diversity we value. And that's our 4 values.
And so the reason we wanted to share those with you is because we, as a session, have been working on 2 kind of big projects over this last year, actually probably longer than that, but I'm trying to, sorry. And one of those, the first of those, is what we do with this south property. And so, as most of you know, we've talked about that south property extensively, and recently the congregation agreed that we would sell that property and use it for the sake of the neighborhood. And so I'm going to invite a couple members of our session forward to share a little bit about what is going on with our south property.
Beginning this fall, we had some small group conversations. We had discussions with the session members about what our mission priorities would be for the south property. And we came up with the 4 priorities that you see on the screen out of these conversations: affordable housing, food insecurity, mental health and healthcare, and child care and education. And we hired Shane and Heather Bohart, who are real estate people who have been guiding us these last 6 or 7 months. And their conversations with us have helped us to understand better some of the things that are involved in selling our property based on using our values and the priorities we've set. We've come to the conclusion that affordable housing is probably one of the best benefits to families in Brighton, and a financial benefit to our church as well. By December, and we need the next slide, we started inviting housing organizations to present ideas and concepts of housing that would be appropriate to our south property. Presentations to the session came from the first 3 organizations so far: Brighton Housing, Archway Communities, and Habitat for Humanity. That we have not yet invited an organization having to do with memory care. That may be coming up. But all 3 of the presentations we've heard were very professional, and were actually pretty exciting to hear. And I'm going to have Dave talk about some of the concepts that we heard from these organizations.
Okay, I may repeat a little bit of what Linda said, but as she said, we identified 3 potential organizations that would like to work with us to develop that property, on the south property. And each organization gave us a 45-minute presentation with lots and lots of information. I had to go back over a couple of them and just review everything they said, because there's a lot of information in there that it's hard to pick up during that conversation with them. But all the site plans included variations of affordable housing. And I'm saying affordable housing, not low-income housing. There's a little bit of difference there. But the Brighton Housing Authority, for example, they had a plan that included townhomes, duplexes, and apartments. The townhomes maybe would be actually purchased, so there could be a mix there. Archway's plan included a senior housing for seniors like us.
Not all of us.
As well as multifamily housing. And then, of course, Habitat for Humanity, their whole emphasis is on building homes and having people purchase them and helping people purchase them. But ultimately, the site will be developed based on a needs assessment and the desires of our church. I mean, we're a huge part of this. And a common theme in all the presentations was to provide supportive services to the occupants. So they have stable housing, which is huge. They're become more self-sufficient and eventually can move from renting to buying. And some of the services that could be provided, that they provide with other groups that they work with that kind of dovetail into all this would be maybe financial education, possibly food insecurity, daycare, mental health, to name a few. And each of these plans had a clubhouse that would be on the property that could be used by a nonprofit, for example, to provide some of these services. I was thinking of like the Pennock Center, for example. And their whole goal is not to provide a handout, but a hand up. And so you'd have the facilities, but you'd also have the support behind those facilities for the people, which addresses, all the values that we have. And each of the organizations, as I said before, they provided us with the wealth of information. And session really will have to take a look at these presentations that were recorded and just study them, because there's a lot of information in there. These three organizations also have the staff and the expertise to actually make all this happen that we don't have, obviously. And there's some questions too that are going to have to be answered. Water, for example, how are you going to get water to this facility? Financing, zoning changes. Community will have to be involved, because this is going to have a big impact on our community. And so there's a lot of groundwork that'll have to take place in the meantime. And the Brighton Housing Authority, they said this is a perfect time for this kind of a project, because the city and the Housing Authority received a grant to study the housing needs in Brighton and develop a long-term plan. And so that would also help guide us as to what we could do with this property. We're not alone in this. There are a number of churches that are in the same situation as we are, with a shrinking population, but a lot of extra property and assets that they have that they want to do something with. And so we're not alone in this. I think that's all I have.
Okay. All right. Next slide, Donna, please. This slide shows where we're going in the next couple of months. When we have all the presentations done, we'll be requesting a final proposal from each of the presenters. We hope to have a final candidate by March 1st, and then we can come back to you and inform you about that candidate. And the final step will be the approval of the presbytery on its March 28th assembly meeting.
So all of this is hopeful to be closed on that property by the end of this year. And so there will still be, like Dave was saying, there are still steps that will need to take place, and so we won't have a final closing on that property probably until the end of the year or close to it, at which point the work can begin. So we'd like to open it up to you all for questions, and we'll answer those questions as best we can. Yeah, Joe? So the question is whether the property will be sold or leased. Did one of you want to answer that?
That's an option that could go either way. Because I know they said that some people actually do lease the properties and they'll get a monthly income, but we don't know yet which would be best for us, but it definitely is an option.
Either one of those is possible. We just don't know yet how
Right.
that will shake out. Some of that will probably come to us from the final and best offers that we get from, they may say, well, we can lease it to you and do this, or we can sell it or buy it and do this. So, okay.
So, how do you settle on these 3 counties? I know I sent Chris several emails, they still go on. Businesses, groups that build for a county. How do you settle on these 3?
So the question is how we settled on these 3. We have worked, like we mentioned before, Shane and Heather Bohart have done a fair amount of this work. Some of the people, like both the Brighton Housing Authority and the Habitat for Humanity, were contacts that I already had. And then Archway was one that was kind of an organization that has more resources than the Brighton Housing Authority and Habitat do. And so we wanted to kind of bring one of those in there. And like there are a couple of more that we may see if we feel it's necessary. And so when you sent me some emails, I sent those on to Shane and said, you take a look at these, see what they have to offer. And Shane has been insistent. He loves the word fiduciary. I think it's his favorite word. He does need a t-shirt, just a white t-shirt with black lettering that says fiduciary on it. But he uses it all the time to insist, my job is to help to represent you, the church. And so he is very, very clear that he's not making any decisions, that he's trying to help us accomplish what we want to accomplish. And he has been, and it's been a godsend for me to be able to say, hey, I don't have the time to look into this or research it, but here you go. and he's been very, very helpful. Both he and Heather have been incredibly helpful in that regard. Are there other questions? Yeah, Joan?
Since you mentioned something about the clubhouses and potentially having the Pennock Center be involved with some of this, can you tell us a little bit more of what the discussion was about?
Restate the question. So the question was whether or not we could give a little bit more information about this clubhouse idea or the services that might be provided, in particular in regards to the potential with the Pennock Center.
So they would provide in the clubhouse space for a nonprofit or nonprofits to come in to provide whatever services, we would want to provide that site, depending on whatever the needs analysis is, what they need. So it's, that Pennock Center is just an example of maybe, somebody that could move in there.
The other thing is, not all 3 presentations included a clubhouse. We're looking at various conceptual ideas, and so we can't say there's going to be a clubhouse out there. So,
Right.
And that can be part of the proposals that
yeah.
Correct.
tell them that
Yeah.
maybe that's one of the important things we
Yeah, we're in the conceptual stage right now.
Joe? Mickey Mouse. The question was, who's going to own the clubhouse? Again, that kind of depends. The organization, whichever organization ends up purchasing the property and building, will own the building and the property. And so, and some of what they've been doing is saying we can not only provide housing, we can also provide these different kinds of services, and these are things that we consider when we build housing, recognizing that oftentimes people need more than a roof. They need other supports as well. Holly? Oh, just a second, sorry. John, I'll come to you in just a second. Go ahead, Holly.
Was it, I don't think the concept was that Pennock Center would move into the clubhouse, but would just provide some services like a branch. Some
Use the mic. Use the mic, Dave. Okay, go ahead, John.
At one time, we talked about having a buffer to this property. Is that still part of the plan as to about where that large tree is out here where we do our outdoor services?
Yes, so the question is, do we still plan to have a buffer in between the two properties? And yes, the church will still own the land on the south side of the parking lot about out to the cottonwood tree, actually just a little bit beyond that cottonwood tree. One of the things we're talking with the developers about too is helping to use that space as a shared space between the church and the whatever is built out there, so that we have a shared space that if we want to kind of start to build community between our church and those who are living there, we kind of have some of that space to do that. So yes.
And I also like to add that the three organizations provided site plans, potential site plans, so they had everything laid out where the buildings were, where the parking was, where the clubhouse potentially could be. And so...
And in all of them, there is that space
Yes.
there. They understand that the 5 acre, where the plot line is for that 5 acres.
And they've all walked the property, so they understand the layout of it.
Other questions? So as Linda mentioned, we are hopeful that within hopefully the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll be able to come back to you with a final proposal. And then from there, we will be able to take that on to the presbytery. I have been in conversation with the Property and Finance Committee in the presbytery and let them know what we were doing. They understand that we will probably be selling that property for less than we could get for it on the open market, because our intent is to provide affordable housing. And one of the ways that can happen is if we sell that property for a little bit less, so that the developers don't have to recoup quite as much money. And so that's one of the steps in there. And so that is something that the presbytery is aware of, and we want to make sure that you are all aware of as well. We are very mindful of the financial needs of the church, and are making sure that we take those into consideration. But in order to, if we go back to those values, courageous love and selfless mission and Christ-centered, right? There's, I think we all need to remember and understand that we as a church have to be considerate of more than our own future and our own needs. And so that's something that your session is working really hard to make sure that they do. And they've done a lot of hard work, and I'm incredibly grateful for all of them.
And our fiduciary is understanding that very point that you're making.
Yes. All right.
And one more thing, I would encourage, just get a flavor for these organizations that we're talking to. Take a look at Archway Community, and they have a great website that explain everything that they do. They're faith-based and a great organization.
All right. Julie, last question. The question is whether or not the church would be able to keep the mineral rights under that property if we sold the property. I don't know the full answer to that. My guess is that if we sell the property, the mineral rights go with the property. If we lease the property, the mineral rights stay with us.
Or I think we'd have the option to keep them.
Oh, we have the option?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. All right. We can keep them, I guess. Yeah, there's no question that you guys are smarter than me. That was never a question. Now, the session would also like to share with you a little bit of some of the other work that we've been doing on a new leadership model for the church. And so this first part is me, right? I think this first part is me. Okay. So we started this conversation as a congregation back in, I don't remember when, the first part of 2022. Megan came and she facilitated some conversations that we started to have. And we started to have some conversations about where our church has been in the past and where it is now, and what are some of the challenges that we face as a church. And I think we're all aware that our congregation is not as big as it once was. It's not as young as it once was. I think, sorry for those of you for whom that comes as a rude realization, but generally we have about 60 people in worship on most Sundays. We have between, I'd say, 80 and 85 who are regular worshipers with us. We have 12 different committees. Look in your annual report. There are a lot of committees in there, and many of you are serving on more than one. Many of the same people serve on multiple committees. And part of the reason that this poses a challenge for us is because this is not sustainable if we continue to go in this way. Another thing that I think, if we can go to that next slide, is that in 2023, and this has been going on for a while, I think we're all aware that there's a growing segment of the American population for whom worship doesn't seem relevant. For those of us for whom worship matters, we come, we participate, we're fed by it. I love worship. And I would be involved in worship even if I wasn't a pastor, because it matters to me. And I think that's true for all of you as well. But we cannot continue with the assumption that a worship service will work as the primary means of interacting with the world around us. Especially for young people, those of you who have kids and grandkids, you know how busy they are. You know that they're out 6 nights a week, and getting up early on a Sunday morning isn't something that they want to do. My own family isn't here this morning because there's a conflict. It happens, and it happens more and more regularly, and the church of the future is not going to be a church that engages the world around it predominantly through worship. That doesn't mean we stop doing worship. It matters to all of us. It feeds us. It's where we come to be together. It's a good thing, and we will continue to do it. But one of the things that we have got to start to think about is, how do we involve the community around us in, how do we partner with the community around us? How do we meet them where they are, rather than asking them to come and sit in a worship service with us, one that is an awful lot like a foreign culture for many of them. If you talk to somebody who's not a regular attender at a worship service and they come into a worship service, they're like, oh, everybody's standing. Oh, now we're sitting. Oh, what's this confession thing that we're doing? There's a lot of stuff that we understand because we're a part of this culture. But there's a lot of things that people don't understand because they've never been a part of this kind of culture. And so it's daunting to step into a worship service and say, okay, I'm now going to be a part of a church, because it's a foreign language, it's a foreign culture for them. But those same people often care deeply about what's going on in the world. They often want to make a difference in the world. They often want to participate in taking care of the pains in the world, in feeding hungry people, and meeting the needs of those who are struggling. And that's something that we as a church try to do at every opportunity. And so there are ways that we can meet people where they are and help them be introduced to this concept of God or of Christian community in ways that they might be more comfortable, things that they actually want to participate in. And so one of the things that we as a session have really been talking about and kind of wrestling with is twofold. How do we model our leadership so that it's sustainable, so that we can do this work that we have together? And just as importantly, how do we invite the world around us to participate in that work? Okay, and so I'm going to turn this over now to the session. They have been working really hard on this, and we spent a lot of times talking about it, about this change, and so I don't remember who's first. Apparently they don't either. All right, who's on first? What's on second? And I think I don't know's on third. Yeah.
Come on up, sister. All right, there you go. So one of the things that Session has been trying to think about is from a change management perspective, it's hard to talk about this concept without grounding it in some kind of clear expectations, like what is this really going to look like, and what does this mean for me if I sit on a committee? And so part of that is that we have the design of fewer committees. We have an administrative committee, and I'm going to have you help me with the formal names. One is a community that really focuses on engaging with the congregation through a variety of ways, and the other committee is a committee that focuses on engaging with the community. And I would just say that there's a lot of intersection in all of those three types of committees, because there may be things that cross lines of all three pieces. So the administrative committee will be the committee that talks about finance and personnel and buildings and grounds. And those would also be great ways to engage our congregation and the community in some of those things. So one of the ways that we're trying to sort of kick this off is by providing some job descriptions for what does this mean if I sit on one of these committees. So I think that's the next slide. Yep, that's our help wanted sign. So our process is that Holly's going to talk timeline in a minute, but for now our process is if you currently sit on one of the 12 committees that we currently have, but you'd like to be a member of one of these other three committees and sort of be the, you are kind of like the brainchild of that work. So you are thinking about what are the activities we're going to do? What does the calendar look like? How do we mesh these things? And so you have to have characteristics and traits about yourself where you're willing to collaborate and be flexible. So we really talked about in our job description, how do our shared values, how are they embodied in this work? So as you can see, those values really drive our job descriptions. So I think that probably all of the work that we're trying to do is work that we currently do. I think that the bottom bullet, where we demonstrate an openness to new ideas and new ways of doing things in our walk with Jesus Christ, is probably one of the most compelling and important qualities as you think about joining a new committee. I think we can go to the next one, Donna. And the next part is, how do we work as a team, and how do we work with the congregation? If you are a person that just wants to sit by yourself and do work by yourself, this is probably not the work for you to sit on these committees. You're going to be engaging a lot. You're going to be engaging with session. You're going to be engaging with congregation, with the other committees. And so it's going to take somebody who is flexible, but also strategic, right? That can start to say, okay, here's the big plan. Here's how we want to make these things happen. And so, Pastor Chris, I'm not sure, we talked at one time about having a size, an ideal size on the committee, but I think we're flexible about that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So Holly, do you want to talk about, I think the next slide is our timeline. Because one of the things that's I'm going to talk about is what to do if you want to be on a committee, and we're currently working on an online application as well as a paper application, so that here in the next little bit, I'll let Holly describe more about that, are some next steps.
As you can tell from the previous discussion about the South property, session is going to be rather busy until April. And you all know that change is difficult for everybody. And the new committee structures represent a huge change from the way we always did it and what we're really comfortable with, to something that is really new and outside of what any of us are comfortable with. So we're not going to jump in and have this go into effect April 1st, April Fools. We're going to ease into this because it's a work in progress. We're not here to tell you we've got all the answers and have got it all figured out. We don't. We're trying something new to live into our values. And also, it dawned on me listening to Chris's sermon to do what Chris's sermon was about, to be able to care about one another here in the congregation and to be in relationship with the community beyond us. So, if you're somebody who is passionate about some of the projects that go on in this church, and I think there's a lot of them. There's a lot of, if you listen to what Chris said we did, all of our lunches and our dinners and our things that we do, and you want to do those things, you may not want to be on a committee, or you may want to be on a committee and oversee and work and interact with session. There's a place for everybody. We're going to be collecting interest forms. What do you want to do? Where do you want to be involved in February? From the whole, you've got a chance to figure out, where do I want to be involved? What's my passion? March, we're going to have meetings. Have we, in our interest forms, touched on everything? We don't want something to drop through the cracks. Have we captured everything that we do? And then we're going to have transition meetings between the current committees and the new committees. Have we figured it out as best we can? We're pretty sure that along the way we're going to go, oops, forgot about that one, and figure out, well, where does that go? How does it best fit? And then on June 1st, we're going to begin our new committees, our new alignments, and go forth, onward Christian soldiers. And we're going to give it a go. But believe me, as we go forth from June, we're going to be evaluating and answering questions and figuring it out and maybe reslotting some things. Who knows? As I said, this is a work in progress.
So I'd like to highlight a couple of things, probably things that I should have highlighted before. And that is, one, the changes that we want to make are not necessarily changes about getting rid of things that we do in this church, something that you care about. Our intent, I mean, right now we have a worship committee and we have a mission committee and we have an outreach committee and we have an education committee, and we could go on down the list for quite some time. But what the intent is to stop and consider, as we do these things, how does our worship engage the congregation? How does it meet the needs of the congregation? And something that we don't consider all that often, how might our worship engage those who are not a part of this congregation? And that is true for every committee we have. Education. We often stop and ask, what is it how is it that we can learn together? But are there not ways that we might want to be engaged in conversation with the world around us? There are a lot of conversations that need to happen in our world where there's not a safe place to have those conversations, right? And we could help provide those a space to have those conversations, okay? The same thing is true for mission, as I already mentioned. Oftentimes, I mean, the mission committee has done tremendous work through the years, vetting and reaching out and serving and doing. But when the mission committee wants to invite people to participate in the work that they do, where do they go? They go to the 60 people who sit in these services. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, we just got done hearing about all of the work that these 60 to 80 people do together, and it's incredible. But what would happen if we started to partner with people who aren't necessarily a part of this community? And what could it mean for them as we invite them to help us collect food for a food bank, or to raise money for Heifer International? I mean, stop and think about your own children who may not want to come to worship. Would they be willing to participate in something like that, where they don't necessarily have to come and sit in here, but it gives us a chance to get to know them and build relationships with them, so that maybe worship doesn't seem quite so awkward? Our objective is not to fill the pews, but because my guess is for every 100 people we interact with out there, 3 of them might come in here and join us in worship. Okay, but there are a lot of ways that what we're trying to do, one, is make our leadership structure more manageable, as we've talked about, but 2, is to help us start to think about the things that we already do, the things that we do well. Do we do them just for us? Or might they also be a way that we can meet with the people in our community and our neighborhoods and participate with them, so that they too have the opportunity to participate in the work of the kingdom of God and make a difference in the world? And I would guess that as we build relationships with those people, some of them may even choose to join us here in worship. Whether or not that's our objective, I think that may happen. So those are 2 things that I really wanted to make sure that you understood about why we were doing what we were doing. Does anybody have any questions for the session? The session does. Okay, go, Jen. Yes, the elders and deacons will continue largely unchanged in the work that they do. Both the elders and deacons are required by the Book of Order, and we will continue to have those 2 committees as well. So essentially, there will be 5. Our intent is right now we have more committees than we do elders. And so that makes it difficult sometimes. And so our intent is, with fewer committees, we can have 2 or 3 session members who participate in that work and really start to kind of bridge the gap, because there are some ways that some of that communication and connection hasn't been as successful as we had hoped over the past couple of years. Are there other questions?
I just have a comment. I know that in session we talked about people who are passionate about one particular project and they don't have to sit on a committee.
Right.
I want to make sure that's clear.
So what Linda mentioned is that with these committees, our objective right now, most of the work that we do in most of the committees, when something needs to happen, we look around to the committee table and say, okay, who wants to do this? Our hope is that for all of you who don't sit on committees, because I know there are people, and I've had people come up to me and say, I'm kind of excited about this because I hate sitting on committees, but I love to do the work. And so I don't want to sit on the committee, but I would happily raise my hand if there was a project that needed to get done. That's what we're trying to facilitate. We're trying to facilitate that those who are good and love to do that kind of committee work can continue to do that, can continue to help put together a calendar and make sure the budget is in place and take care of those details that that have to be done in order for us to actually be able to do the work. And then they can say, hey, we've got this project coming up. We could use 3 or 4 volunteers for the next 6 weeks who would be willing to help us complete this project, right? And so I don't know about you, but for me, to have somebody come and say, would you like to sit on a committee for the next however many years, okay, in perpetuity, is difficult. But to have somebody come up to me and say, we need your help for this project, it's going to be 4 weeks, it's going to be 6 weeks, it's going to be 2 months, whatever, to be able to say, oh, there's the end date. Yeah, I can commit to the next 2 months for that. So our hope is that those of you who want to be involved in the work but maybe don't want to go to a committee meeting every month have the opportunity to say, yeah, I'd love to help with that. A good example of this is just a couple of weeks ago, Julie said, hey, we got to get all of these decorations, Christmas decorations down. Do you think you could make an announcement in church on Sunday morning and see if we could get some help? And I think Julie and Donna had more help than they knew what to do with, okay? And typically what would happen is the worship committee would look around and say, okay, which one of us is going to take care of this on Sunday morning? Okay, and so what this does is it opens the door for all of us to be able to say, you know what, I'd love to help do that for the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months. Okay, and so we're really trying to make sure that we open the door for everybody who wants to be involved, and we as a session would love to see everybody in our church, every single person who comes here to worship, every single member, to be able to say, that's the thing that I care about, and I'm going to invest my time and my energy over however many weeks it takes to make that happen. For some of you, it might be worship. For some of you, it might be New Genesis. For some of you, it might be workship. For some of you, it might be personnel reviews, right? I don't know. For some of you, it might be helping out with buildings and grounds. And so the hope is that we give everybody the opportunity to participate in the work of the church in a meaningful way and in a way that allows them to feel like they're connected and involved and engaged in what we do here as a congregation and as a church. Any other questions? Joe? 2. That's actually 2 questions, Joe. So Joe's question is, when would these committees meet, and could they meet virtually? We have talked about the possibility of having kind of one night in the month where all the committees, all 3 of these committees met and did their work, so that we had kind of some common time together and we could share some things and maybe do some of that. None of that is cemented. As Holly mentioned, like, we want to start to get this in place and start to take some steps and rework things as we need to rework them, and make sure things aren't slipping through the cracks, and trying to do different things in order to facilitate the work that needs to be done. If it doesn't work out that way, I don't think anybody on the session's like, oh no, if you want to be, you have to be able to be here on this night. And if it works better to do things remotely, then that's okay too, right? I think we would probably leave that up to the committees. I don't think that's something that necessarily needs to be mandated by the session. And really, I don't want any of you to hear that there's any kind of mandate coming down from the session. We're hopeful that we can. I know that there are some of you who are a little nervous, and the change makes you a little uncomfortable, but we're hopeful that we can work this out together. And there's a reason why we're trying to stretch this out through the first 6 months of this year, and hopefully get something in place by the first part of the summer, when there's not quite as much going on, to give these committees a chance to kind of get their feet wet as we move into September, when things really start to ramp up again. Yeah, you can ask your 3rd question if you'd like. Yeah, so the nominating committee is a little bit different in that it's not. So the nominating committee probably falls more, is probably more like session and deacons, in that it is nominated every year. The nominating committee has to nominate the next year's nominating committee, and then the congregation approves it, much like the nominating committee has to nominate elders and deacons. And so in some ways, it kind of doesn't necessarily fit into any of those categories very neatly. Yeah, Bonnie?
I love the idea, but as all major changes, the devil's in the details. And I'm just thinking, just trying to figure out how this works. So it sounds like the 3 major committees, in a way, are determining the projects of the church. Like when it starts up, is everything going, they're going to try to continue everything that's been going and just sort of act as recruiting agents? Or is everything off the table until somebody grassroots comes and says, I would like to see us participate in the Culture Fest in the city of Brighton? And at that point, the committee considers that, or gets it approved by session, or that's where it breaks down for me.
So I think, as we have talked about it as a session, and session, feel free to correct me if I am misrepresenting this in any way, is that at this point, I think we'd like to try to continue to do all the things that we are doing. The work that we need to do is to figure out, is this something that we think is predominantly congregational engagement, or something that should be considered as community engagement? And so the work that we're doing now, we want to continue to do. What we're trying to do is give more people an opportunity to be a part of that work. And so what we also hope to have happen is that we have somebody who comes and says, I'd like to, what was the thing that, the Culture Fest, okay. Culture Fest, that sounds like make good cheese. But so we've got the Culture Fest here in Brighton. Apparently it's not about cheese. But somebody comes and says, hey, we'd really like to do this. And so they would come to, I would guess, kind of the community engagement group and say, here's what this is. Here's what what we hope to have accomplished with that. I think, as is always the case, it becomes the responsibility of the leadership to make sure that that's something that fits within our values, right? That we can say, yes, this is something that we want to be about as a church. And so ultimately, I think for those sorts of new situations, I think this gives a little bit more opportunity for things to kind of bubble up from the grassroots, or at least that's the hope. And that committee then that says, okay, we've got the master calendar here, we've got the budget here, can look at those things and say, oh, well, we do have that weekend open, and start a conversation. What do we need to be a part of this? At which point, if that committee and the session says, yes, it fits with our values, we've got the money and the resources available for that, we can come back to the congregation. And again, rather than looking around the committee and saying, who wants to make this happen, we can come back to the congregation, and I can stand up here on a Sunday morning and we could put into the weekly news, hey, Bonnie Simcox is looking to do this with Culture Fest. This is how it fits with our values. If this is something that you would like to participate in, see Bonnie. Okay? And at that point, we can kind of say, wow, we got great response from that. That seems like it's something that the church seems to care about. Let's make that happen. Or, that's on. Or maybe you say, I'd really like to do this, and nobody in the congregation really says, yeah, I'd like to help. I'd like to be a part of this. That helps us know too. Do we want to use our resources for this that isn't really a part of, like the congregation doesn't really seem to be interested in pursuing this? Is this worth investing our time and our energy in? And we have kind of a bit of a measure for whether or not that's going to work, determined by whether or not the congregation is willing to rise up and participate in that and make it happen. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I guess part of it is I have a hard time envisioning it, and because it doesn't exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the idea is great. I'm just trying to put flesh and structure on that, and I don't quite understand yet how it's going to work. But maybe that's true of all of us until we start making it work. We don't know how it's going to work.
And I'd like to highlight what Holly said, in that the session doesn't have flesh on this yet either, right? I mean, I think the session kind of has the bones in place, and what we need to do over the next 6 months is try to put the flesh on that. And after the fact, we're still going to find, oh wait, this connectional piece isn't here. We need to make sure that this gets taken care of, right? And so the objective here of the session is not to just plop something down in your laps and say, go make it happen. Okay, our objective really is, all right, first step is let's find the people who want to sit on these committees and make these things happen. Second step is, okay, now that we have these in place, let's work with them to get the bones in place and make sure that get the flesh on things and make sure things are working. And working together with existing committees. So to be able to go to the mission committee and say, hey, we need to talk about your calendar because we want to make sure these things don't get lost. To go to the education committee and say, okay, what do you have planned? What do you have going on? Right? And so those sorts of things, like there's going to have to be a lot of collaboration. So that's why not until the first part of June, and that's not set in stone, right? If we need more time, we'll take more time. Not until the first part of June do we say, okay, we're going to start running with this full speed and see what happens. And even then, we're going to have to be open to conversation. And the session's intent is to go back to both the committees that are now in place and the old committees and say, what's not working? What do we need to address? Okay, that's going to have to happen if we're going to be able to make this transition smoothly and in a way where everybody feels like they've had a part in this conversation. Steve?
Leah,
Steve. So to Steve's point, Steve said we're looking to put together a simplified flow chart, and that's proving difficult in part because our committees right now are based on activities, right? Mission, education, worship, outreach. Like those are the way our committees are structured, and what the hope of this next set of committee structures is more about direction. And so it doesn't, you can't just say, okay, mission plops in here. It doesn't work quite that cleanly. Part of it is more about, okay, which of these things that have been going on in the mission committee are really about our congregational engagement, and what of these things that we've been doing as a mission committee could we consider might be a part of engaging the community. So that flow chart is not as simple because of the very different foundations of these two committee structures. Not that I haven't looked. If any of you do, that'd be great. I would love to talk to their leadership. Meryl? Wait, I want you to say this because if it made sense to you, maybe it'll make sense to somebody else.
Tell me if I'm wrong, anybody. Is that instead of having big committee meetings that meet every month and everybody sits there and maybe they're not involved in the current projects, so it's kind of a waste of their time. Have smaller committees that act like administrators of the topic, whatever it is, and then they go out, they decide on their projects, and they go out and recruit for people to actually carry out the projects, so that the committee meetings are small groups, and you don't have people just sitting there in the committee that aren't really involved in what's ever going on at the moment. So say their only project is to do whatever, Zimbabwe. So if Zimbabwe's not doing anything at the moment, they don't have to sit in the meeting. So small committees that are acting as administrators for the projects, then when they need people to do something, they go out and recruit it. They find out who's interested in doing that, and those people come forward. So there's going to be a lot more recruitment necessary from the pulpit or from the website. And so then people will kind of come and go from that project, but they won't always be sitting in a committee meeting. Mm-hmm. Does that sound right?
I think that's a fairly, for the most part, a fairly good description of what we're talking. It's part of the reason we want to do this is so that the committees aren't quite so large, and those who want to do the work but don't want to sit on a committee are able to do so.
And you don't get people burned out because they're
Right.
on 2 and 3 committees.
Right.
And they don't have to meet every month.
Right.
So what that says to me logistically is your committees might consist of 2 session members and 3 congregational members. Mm-hmm. So you would have maybe 5 on a committee.
There's I will say we're not set. When we started, we were kind of set on that number.
Okay.
I think we moved away from that, like being having
But we're
set
not
numbers.
going to have 12-member committees.
If we could, like if somebody
Well, but-
wanted to,
but-
if there were 12 people who wanted to sit on a committee, we're not going to tell people, no, you can't. But
That would defeat the purpose. I mean, if you're including the people who want to work on a specific project at the time on the committee, but generally of the committee meeting, however frequently they're going to meet, I would think smaller is more functional.
I think smaller is more functional, but at the same time, if we've got 10 people who really want to serve on the community engagement team, I don't think anybody's going to say. You have a question from somebody who's streaming? Okay.
Are non-members allowed to be on any of the new committees or just members only?
Non-members can be a part of any committee except for session, deacons, and I think nominating. So any of the other committees they could be a part of.
Any one of these three?
Yes. Yes. We would like people who attend as regularly as possible. Joan? Okay. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Okay, so let me sum up the question. And I think in some ways it's kind of like Bonnie's question, in that both Joan and John, having been a part of personnel, having been a part of buildings and grounds, are looking at that administrative committee and saying, oh man, that's a really tough thing to make happen. Because of the complexity of all of those things, I understand that. And we've talked about that as a session, and that's one of those things, like, we've got the bones in place, the details we're gonna have to work out. And so that's a part of the reason we're trying to move through this slowly. If for some reason we cannot figure out how to make that work, we're gonna have to go back to the drawing board, and we're gonna have to figure something out. Keeping in mind the objective that we have here, the twofold objective: one, making sure that that our leadership structure is sustainable for the long term, and two, trying to figure out how we engage not only our congregation but the community around us. Okay, so that's a great question. It's one we've considered. We've had brief conversations with buildings and grounds and finance and personnel, all about what that might look like. And there have been some ideas and kind of some, that might work. We'll have to work out the details. We don't have the details worked out yet. All right. Well, we'll have to work. I'd like to invite you both to be a part of those conversations. It is right now 20 till noon. And so I am going to ask if you have continued questions about this, to seek out one of our elders or come and talk to me. And we'll try to have that conversation with you. It will be helpful if you do that, to come and talk to your session member about those needs, so that we can, so that the session can know what the concerns are. Okay, we want to work through the issues that we know are going to arise. So if you have further questions moving forward, please make sure to reach out to a session member and share those questions and those concerns with them, and we will can then work to address them. We have no other business that I am aware of. And so at this point, I would look for a motion to receive our annual report. All right, we've got a motion here and a second over here. Dave Hubbard. Okay. All right, is there any further discussion or any questions about the annual report? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of receiving our annual report, please say aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. All those in favor of convening our meeting, please stand and join me for prayer. Adjourning. Sorry, my fault. Did I scare you all? You scared me. All right, let's pray. Lord, for 2022, we give you thanks. There were challenges. You helped us meet them. There were difficulties. There were griefs. There were sorrows. You met us in them. There were joys. There were things to be celebrated and things to rejoice over, and you met us there as well. We give you thanks, God, for this worship and community. We give you thanks for this group of people who love you and want to serve you and follow you as best as we possibly can. We ask that you would give us the faith and the faithfulness to do just that. We pray all of these things in your name. Amen.